Part 1. My name is Michael, and for most of my life, I believed I had it all. A stable, successful career, a beautiful home, and most importantly, the love of my life, Mary. We had been married for 8 wonderful years, and from the outside looking in, our life together was nothing short of perfect. Mary was the woman every man dreamed of having by his side. She was intelligent, compassionate, and breathtakingly gorgeous. She had an elegance about her that made people gravitate towards her effortlessly. We met in college, fell madly in love, and built a life together that felt unshakable. We were the couple others envied, the ones people believed were destined for a lifetime of happiness. Every morning, we followed a routine that felt comforting in its familiarity. I would wake up early, brew coffee for the both of us, and kiss her on the forehead before heading to work. She worked as an executive assistant at a prestigious law firm, and I was a financial analyst, working long hours to ensure our future was secure. We had plans to start a family soon, to take that next step that would solidify our love into something even more tangible. Weekends were spent exploring new restaurants, hiking on scenic trails, or hosting intimate dinner parties with close friends. The laughter, the late-night talks, the affectionate glances across the room, these were the moments that assured me we were untouchable. I always made sure she felt loved, always reminded her how much she meant to me. Whether it was spontaneous flowers delivered to her office or planning a romantic getaway just because, I never let our love fall into monotony. She, in return, was the perfect wife. She supported me in everything I did, celebrated my successes, and held me when the weight of the world became too much to bear. I never doubted her love, not even for a second. But looking back now, I see the warning signs I chose to ignore. The small, almost imperceptible shifts in her behavior. The slight hesitation in her voice when I asked about her day. The way she began guarding her phone more than usual, though I brushed it off as paranoia. Then came the late nights at the office. At first, it was nothing out of the ordinary. Mary had always been dedicated to her job, but something about the way she spoke about work started to change. She mentioned her boss, Richard, more often than usual. I knew of him tall, confident, successful. The kind of man that commanded attention the moment he walked into a room. But I had no reason to feel threatened. Mary was my wife, my best friend, my everything. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. The way she would rush to the bathroom when her phone vibrated, how she suddenly became more invested in her appearance, buying expensive dresses and lingerie that, strangely enough, I had yet to see her wear for me. The whispers of doubt crept into my mind, but I silenced them. I trusted her. I had to trust her. After all, wasn't trust the foundation of any strong marriage? One night, while preparing dinner, I noticed she was distracted. Her phone screen would light up, and she would glance at it with a small, almost secretive smile before placing it face down on the table. When I asked her if everything was okay, she laughed it off, saying it was just a funny text from a coworker. I believed her. The intimacy between us remained, but there were subtle changes. She wasn't as present as she used to be. Our conversations, once filled with excitement and depth, became shallow and rushed. It was as if she was keeping a part of herself away from me, hidden behind a locked door I had no key to. Then, there were the moments when she would cancel plans last minute, blaming unexpected work obligations. I wanted to be the supportive husband, the one who understood that careers sometimes demanded sacrifices. But something gnawed at me, an unsettling feeling that I couldn't shake no matter how much I tried to suppress it. One evening, as we lay in bed, I wrapped my arms around her, pressing my lips against the back of her neck. She stiffened, only for a second, but it was enough for me to notice. I told myself I was overthinking, that the love we shared was too strong for anything to break. But deep down, a storm was brewing, one that I was unprepared to face. I was living in a beautiful illusion, one I was blissfully unaware was about to be shattered. As time went on, the changes in Mary became more noticeable. She started working out more, something she had always done, but now it seemed obsessive. New perfumes, subtle but distinct, lingered on her skin. She was different. She was slipping away, and I felt powerless to stop it. Even our closest friends began to ask if everything was all right. Mary seems distracted lately, one of them mentioned during a dinner gathering. I laughed it off, pretending nothing was wrong. But deep down, I knew they saw what I refused to admit. Then, one evening, I found myself alone at home. Mary had texted, saying she was working late again. I sighed, pouring myself a glass of whiskey, staring at my phone, debating whether I should believe her or finally let my doubts take hold. And then, my world truly began to crack. Part 2. The first time I noticed something was truly different, I convinced myself I was imagining things. Mary had always been affectionate, but now her kisses felt more like routine than passion. Her touch, once warm and lingering, became fleeting, as if she were going through the motions. I told myself it was just stress from work, that I was overanalyzing. But then, there were the late nights. At first, it was once or twice a week, last-minute deadlines, unexpected client meetings. But soon, it became almost every night. She would come home exhausted, collapsing onto the couch with barely a word, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. She used to tell me everything about her day, but now her answers were vague, distant. One evening, I made her favorite dinner, steak, roasted potatoes, a glass of red wine. She barely touched it. "Not hungry," she said, pushing her plate away. Then she smiled at me, a tired, forced smile. "Just a long day. You've been working late a lot," I said carefully, watching for any reaction. She hesitated for a second before nodding. "Yeah, Richard's been piling on a lot of extra work lately. The firm is expanding, and I'm his right hand." Richard again. The name was becoming a constant shadow in our conversations. "Maybe you should take a break," I suggested, forcing a smile. "We could go away for the weekend, just the two of us. Get out of the city." For a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Guilt? Regret? But then it was gone. She sighed. "I can't, Michael. Work is just too crazy right now. Maybe later." Later never came. Her appearance changed, too. Mary had always been effortlessly beautiful, but now she was putting in more effort than usual, too much effort. New clothes, expensive lingerie I had never seen her wear for me. A gym membership she suddenly became obsessed with. She had always stayed fit, but this was different. One morning, I caught her smiling at her phone. When she noticed me looking, she quickly turned the screen away, locking it. My stomach tightened. "Who's that?" "Just a friend from work," she said, brushing it off. "Which friend?" She rolled her eyes. "Michael, don't start. It's just some work stuff." Work. It was always work. That night, as she slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling. The weight in my chest grew heavier with each passing day. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. But the doubt was creeping in, poisoning everything. Then, the perfume incident happened. Mary always wore the same perfume, a light, floral scent I had come to associate with her. But one night, when she returned from working late, she smelled different. A bolder, muskier scent clung to her skin. My stomach churned. "You smell different," I said as casually as I could. She blinked, caught off guard. "Oh, one of the girls at work let me try her perfume. I guess it stuck. It was a small thing, something most men wouldn't notice. But I did. And it didn't sit right. I needed proof. I needed to know if my paranoia was justified or if I was losing my mind over nothing. The next day, I made up an excuse to leave work early. I parked a block away from her office and waited. Hours passed. My fingers drummed against the steering wheel, my nerves a mess. Then, just after 8 p.m., she walked out. But she wasn't alone. Richard was with her. I watched as they walked to his car. They weren't holding hands, weren't touching. But the way she looked at him, the way she smiled, it was a look I hadn't seen in months. A look that used to be reserved for me. My blood ran cold as he opened the passenger door for her, and she slid in without hesitation. She had told me she was working late. She had lied. And suddenly, the reality I had been avoiding came crashing down around me. The next morning, I pretended everything was normal. I kissed her goodbye, watched her leave, and then sat down at the kitchen table, my coffee growing cold as my mind raced. I needed more than just suspicions. I needed undeniable proof. I started checking her phone bill, looking at the numbers she called and texted the most. One number stood out immediately. Repeated calls, often late at night. I searched it online, Richard's office line. My chest tightened. That night, I casually asked, "How was work?" She hesitated. "Busy. Exhausting." "Did Richard keep you late again?" She nodded, sipping her wine, not meeting my eyes. I clenched my jaw. "Yeah? That's strange, because I called your office today. They said he left at 6. The color drained from her face. "Michael, where were you, Mary?" I asked, my voice colder than I expected. She set her glass down, her fingers trembling. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do." The silence stretched between us, suffocating. I could see the wheels turning in her mind, searching for a way out. Then, she did something that shattered me more than anything else. She looked away. Not denial. Not anger. Just silence. And that was all the confirmation I needed. Something inside me broke. The woman I had loved for years, the woman I had given my heart to, was slipping away. And I didn't know if I had the strength to stop it. Part 3. I couldn't ignore it any longer. Doubts, lies, avoidance, everything pointed in the same direction. But I needed irrefutable proof, something that would leave no room for her to deceive me. So I did something I never thought I would do. I put a voice-activated recorder under the passenger seat of her car. I hated myself for it. I hated what I was becoming. But I needed the truth, no matter how much it would destroy me. The next day, she went to work as usual. My heart was pounding as I watched her drive away, knowing that by the end of the night, my whole world could be destroyed beyond repair. Hours passed. I went about my duties in a fog, checking my phone every few minutes, waiting for the moment when I could pick up the device. When she finally came home, kissing me on the cheek with the same distant expression, I felt sick. She took a shower before dinner, another habit that had recently become a routine. I clenched my fists, rage and devastation raging inside me. Then, after she fell asleep, I went out to her car, took the recorder and sat in the garage, my hands shaking as I pressed the play button. At first, the static, the hum of the engine. Then voices. Her voice. His voice. Richard's. "I can't stay long," she whispered. "You say that every time," he muttered, and then there was the rustle of bodies moving, the creak of leather seats. "Michael is starting to suspect something. I can't keep lying to him." A sharp laugh. "You don't have to lie, Mary. Just walk away from him." My breath caught in my throat. My pulse was pounding in my ears. "It's not that simple," she said, her voice softer. I don't know what to do." "You know exactly what to do," Richard said firmly. "You're mine, Mary. You've been mine for months." My stomach twisted sharply, while rising to my throat. Then, the sound that broke me completely, a kiss. Wet, desperate, unmistakable. I threw the recorder across the garage, the plastic shattering on the concrete floor. My hands clenched into fists, my body shook with such fierce anger that I could barely breathe. It was no longer just a suspicion. It was not just paranoia. It was reality. My wife, my Mary, had betrayed me in the most unforgivable way. I returned to the house in a daze, my whole world turned upside down. She was still asleep, wrapped up in our bed, as if she had just returned from the arms of another man. I stood over her, watching her chest rise and fall, and all sorts of thoughts were running through my head. How long had she been planning to leave me? How many times had she come home after being with him and kissed me as if nothing had happened? How could she look me in the eye and pretend to still love me? I wanted to wake her up. I wanted to drag her out of bed and yell at her until she had no choice but to confess. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I picked up the phone and did what I should have done a long time ago. I hired a private investigator. The next week was a living hell. I hardly slept, hardly ate. Every moment I spent around her, I felt like I was suffocating. She was still lying, still pretending. And I played along, pretending I didn't know the truth, waiting for the evidence that would tear her world apart the way she had torn mine apart. The investigator worked quickly. In a few days, I had photos, videos, everything I needed to confirm what I already knew. Photos of them together in hotel lobbies, sneaking into parking lots, her sitting in his car and kissing him the same way she had once kissed me. But what was the worst part? She looked happy. Happier than she had been with me in months. Maybe even years. I stared at the photos, my heart a cold, lifeless weight in my chest. It was not a mistake. It was not a moment of weakness. It was a choice. A choice she had made over and over again. And now I had to make mine. That evening, I waited for her to come home. I was sitting at the dining room table, the photos laid out in front of me, the recorder lying carefully beside me. The proof of her betrayal, undeniable and inescapable. She walked in, smiling. "Hello, darling. We need to talk." She stopped, her fingers tightening on the strap of her purse. "What's wrong?" I gestured to the table. "Sit down." She sat down, her eyes scanning the photos. I watched the color fade from her face and her hands begin to tremble. "Michael." "Don't lie to me," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "I have the tapes. I have pictures. I know everything." Silence. She swallowed hard, her eyes glistening with tears. "I never wanted to hurt you." I laughed, an empty, bitter sound. "You never wanted to hurt me? You met with your boss for months behind my back, and you never wanted to hurt me?" I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a death whisper. "Tell me, Mary, when you were with him, when you came home and kissed me, when you let me hold you at night, did you feel guilty? Even for a second?" Tears rolled down her cheeks. "I was miserable. Michael, I didn't know how to tell you. So you let another man use you? I snapped, slamming my fist on the table. She flinched, and I forced myself to breathe to keep my temper in check. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing. I'm sorry. Sorry. That word meant nothing to me now. I stood, my voice cold and final. Get your things. Get out. She looked up, her eyes wide with shock. Michael, please. I said, get out. She stared at me for a long time, as if trying to find some trace of the man who had once loved her. But he was gone. She had killed in the moment she chose Richard over me. She stood up slowly, her hands shaking as she gathered her things. She stopped on the threshold, looking back at me one last time. I loved you, she whispered. I still do. I didn't answer. I just watched her walk out of my life, leaving behind nothing but the wreckage of everything we once were. And when the door closed, I realized that this was only the beginning of my revenge. Part 4. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dimly lit living room, staring at the empty spot on the couch where she used to sit, where we used to curl up together and talk about the future. A future that no longer existed. The rage inside me burned hotter than ever, but beneath that fury was something darker. Something cold. Something calculating. She had destroyed me, shattered my trust, my love, my life. But I wasn't going to let her walk away and rebuild with Richard as if I had never mattered. No, I would make sure they paid for what they did. Both of them. I spent the next few days in silence, methodically crafting my revenge. I didn't want impulsive rage, I wanted destruction. The kind of downfall that left permanent scars, the kind that couldn't be undone. First, I gathered everything I could. Every text, every email, every call log. The private investigator had done more than just get photos. He had access to deleted messages, financial transactions, hotel records. It was all there, an undeniable timeline of their betrayal. Then, I turned my attention to Richard. He thought he was untouchable. Wealthy, powerful, respected. But he had weaknesses I could exploit. I found them easily. His wife, his children, his reputation. He had built an empire on his image, on being the successful, devoted family man. But that was a lie, just like my marriage had been. So I made sure his wife knew the truth. I mailed her everything. Pictures, messages, proof of his late-night escapades with my wife. I imagined the moment she opened the package, the look on her face when she realized the man she thought she knew had been fucking his assistant behind her back. But I wasn't done. The firm Richard worked for had strict ethics clauses. I forwarded copies of the evidence to his partners, making sure to include the specific company policies he had violated. Office affairs were bad for business, and Richard was about to become a liability. As for Mary, she thought she could move on, that she could rebuild with the man she had thrown everything away for. I couldn't let that happen. I froze our joint accounts before she had a chance to withdraw anything. The car she drove? In my name. The home she ran after I kicked her out? Paid for with my money. Within days, she had nothing. No access to funds, no stability, no comfort. She called, of course. Left voicemails, sent messages, begging me to talk. I never responded. Let her panic. Let her feel just a fraction of the betrayal I felt. But I wasn't done yet. I reached out to a friend in the legal field, someone who specialized in divorce cases. We strategized. Mary wouldn't just lose me, she would lose everything. Any settlement she thought she was entitled to would be buried under legal technicalities. The house? Mine. The savings? Locked up in ways she couldn't touch. By the time the papers were served, she had nowhere to go. Then, I made my final move. Richard was already under fire at his firm, his partners scrambling to contain the scandal. But I made sure to tip off the press. A small, anonymous email with a carefully curated selection of evidence. Nothing too blatant, just enough for the rumors to start, for whispers to spread. Soon, his face was plastered across financial news outlets. High-powered attorney Richard Thompson caught in scandal. His credibility eroded overnight. His clients pulled away. His career, the one he had built on control and manipulation, began to crumble. But I wanted more. I wanted to see them truly suffer. I hired another investigator, this time, a digital expert. We traced Richard's activities beyond my wife. He had a pattern, a history of affairs, all covered up with money and influence. The more we dug, the more dirt we uncovered. We leaked just enough to ensure his downfall was irreversible. His wife didn't just divorce him, she took their kids, their house, and a hefty chunk of his wealth. And Mary? She was left with nothing but regret. She tried to reach out to me, tried to come crawling back when Richard's life crumbled beneath him. I let her wait in silence. I let her desperation grow until she showed up at my doorstep one night, rain-soaked and sobbing. "Michael, please. I don't know where to go. I made a mistake. I love you. Please let me fix this." I stared at her, the woman I had once loved more than life itself, and felt nothing but satisfaction. I let the silence stretch between us, then stepped back and closed the door in her face. That was the last time I ever saw her. Richard lost everything. His career, his wealth, his family. He tried to salvage what little he had left, but the damage was done. He was a ruined man. And me? I walked away from the wreckage, free. They thought they could betray me and move on. They thought they could destroy my life and face no consequences. They were wrong. Part 5. I thought I would feel empty once the dust settled, but I didn't. I felt powerful. I had taken everything from them the way they had taken everything from me. But unlike me, they didn't have the strength to rebuild. Mary spiraled quickly. With nowhere to go, she bounced between cheap motels and the kindness of friends who pitied her, until they didn't. The scandal followed her everywhere. People whispered, former colleagues avoided her, even the few friends she had left began to distance themselves. It turns out no one wants to be associated with a homewrecker whose affair became public spectacle. She tried to get another job in the legal field, but Richard's downfall tainted her, too. Law firms didn't want someone tied to such a public scandal. Even those who didn't care about morality saw her as a liability. She was toxic. She was untouchable. And Richard? He suffered even worse. The firm didn't just fire him, they humiliated him. They held a press conference to distance themselves, stating they had zero tolerance for professional misconduct. Clients abandoned him in droves. He had built his empire on trust, and now that trust was gone. Then came the divorce. His wife eviscerated him in court. She took everything, his money, his house, full custody of their kids. The court deemed him unfit due to the scandal and the evidence of multiple affairs that I had made sure his wife saw. His name became a joke in legal circles. No prestigious firm would hire him. He tried to start his own practice, but no one wanted to work with a disgraced attorney. He was drowning, and I made sure he never surfaced. With the press already sniffing around his personal life, it didn't take much to push him further down the abyss. A few anonymous tips about his financial dealings. A deeper look into his past clients. It turns out Richard had been skimming money for years, using loopholes to siphon funds into personal accounts. Nothing major, but enough. Enough for the IRS to take notice. They froze his assets, seized his remaining properties. And in the ultimate stroke of poetic justice, the man who once lived in a mansion found himself living in a cramped one-bedroom apartment in a bad part of town. He reached out to Mary, desperate and alone, but she had nothing left to give him. She had lost everything too. They had destroyed their lives for each other, and in the end, they had nothing. One day, I got a message from a mutual acquaintance. Richard tried to drink himself to death last night. He survived, but he's done. Completely ruined. I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel anything. I just smiled. And Mary? The last I heard, she was working a dead-end job in retail, barely scraping by. The woman who once held herself with elegance and pride now looked exhausted, beaten down by life. I imagined her lying awake at night, thinking about how different things could have been if she had just stayed loyal, if she had just been faithful. She had thrown everything away for Richard, and now she had no one. As for me, I was free. For the first time in years, I was truly free. No more lies. No more betrayal. No more pain. I sold the house we had shared. Bought a condo in the city with a view of the skyline. I quit my job, too many memories tied to the life I had built with her, and started my own consulting business. My work, my rules. And it thrived. I traveled. I went to places Mary and I had once dreamed of visiting together, except now, I did it alone. And it was better that way. No baggage. No deceit. Just me, embracing life on my own terms. I dated again, but this time, I was in control. I didn't let anyone get too close. I enjoyed their company, but I never let my heart get tangled up again. I had learned my lesson. One evening, I was at a bar, sipping whiskey, watching the city lights through the window. A beautiful woman sat beside me. We talked. We laughed. And when she asked about my past, I simply said, I used to be married. She made a mistake. No, I'm better off. And I meant it. I had been broken, but I had rebuilt myself. Stronger. Smarter. Untouchable. Mary and Richard had tried to destroy me. Instead, I destroyed them. and I walked away without a scratch. The end.